We gotta get out of here now. Come on, run this way. Come on.
The movie begins in a breaking news broadcast where international crime lord Liam McCaffrey has died behind bars at the age of 76. From that announcement, we cut straight into a covert mission. A disguised voice crackles through an earpiece, instructing an operative to pick up a secured package from room 556 and to avoid the lobby completely, for there's too many cameras and too many risks. The operative agent then retrieves a concealed keycard and darts through service corridors with practiced ease. Halfway to her target, her phone vibrates. It's her partner, reminding her that she's already late for their date night. She promised that she will be on her way as soon as she finishes a tiny errand. Inside the assigned room, she locates the package. Before she can exit, her partner appears outside the window, clinging to the ledge like a man who scaled the building for romance alone because he did. Their reunion is filled with teasing whispers and quick kisses, right up until their babysitter, the eldest of their children, calls in a panic. That Max, their youngest son, has vomited everywhere, making date night ends instantly. The film shifts to a boisterous Thanksgiving gathering at the Morgan household. Everyone is there, from siblings to parents to cousins. During a cooking mishap, Kyle, the middle child, accidentally sends a kitchen knife flying toward Jessica's mother. Dan, acting on pure instinct, snatches it midair, saving everyone a heart attack. Later, the eldest daughter, Nena, calls from London, where she's studying abroad and doing investigative journalism. The family jokes with her about recently exposing the very criminal whose death filled the news that morning, Liam McCaffrey. Tensions flare, especially when Kyle is reminded of nearly being arrested after erasing his school's entire grading database as a prank. Meanwhile, their mother, Jessica, hints carefully that she's been offered a huge coaching job at Ohio State as the head of women's track, though she still hasn't worked up the courage to tell her husband, Dan. Dan, for his part, is irritated when he learns Nena won't make it home this year for Christmas. At his office later that week, he hears a London bank needs a security evaluation and gets the idea to use the job as an excuse to spend Christmas in London, surprising Nena instead of waiting for her. He brings up the plan while the family is crammed into the car, whilst teaching Kyle how to drive for the first time. Soon the Morgans land in London. They sneak up to Nena's apartment to surprise her. Kyle slips off to find the bathroom only to discover someone showering. Out steps Omar, Nena's boyfriend. Dan panics. Nena calms him down, introducing them formally. Jessica looks Omar up and down and compliments his muscles. Dan is less enthusiastic, no matter how friendly the guy is. The next day, Omar, who's into parkour, shows off some moves to Kyle, and Max eagerly tries to copy him, but takes a tumble. The group rushes over. Omar quietly asks Dan not to smother his kids with fear, explaining his own father never let him do anything, and now they barely speak. Dan takes the advice to heart, but warns him to call his dad it's not too late. The following morning, Dan begins his job at the bank. He studies the layout, effortlessly hacks into a concealed access point, and bluntly tells the so-called manager that the security is embarrassingly weak. Inside the secured sections, Dan disables multiple systems with irritating ease. When a worker shows up to complain they aren't allowed inside that area, Dan improvises, barking that there's an enraged client outside needing attention. They reach the vault, which requires an employee card. To the manager's astonishment, Dan has already lifted one from the worker moments earlier. But as soon as the door slides open, Dan grabs the manager in a chokehold because he's realized this man isn't who he claims to be. The worker earlier didn't recognize him at all. The imposter warns Dan not to reach for anything until he can prove something, pulls out a phone, and reveals a live stream showing his men holding Jessica captive. He orders Dan to open a specific safety box. Inside lies a single key. Then the man finally explains. His name is Finn, and he is Dan's half-brother. He shows an old photo of Dan and his father standing with a housekeeper's child. Dan is stunned as Finn explains that he's been overlooked all his life, and now Dan must take the fall for this robbery or Finn's team will kill him. Dan, forced, walks out pretending Finn is his hostage. An alarm blares. Finn's people return, Jessica, taped to a gun. Dan climbs into the captor's vehicle and is whisked away. The police swarm. Jessica, gun taped to her hand, flees with Dan through alleys and into a shop, grabbing a woman's purse to hide the weapon. Meanwhile, Finn discovers Dan stole the key and orders everyone to turn around. At a nearby park, the Morgan kids receive Dan's urgent call. Nena grasps the danger immediately. She commands everyone to move. Dan and Jessica sprint through the market, finally ripping the taped gun off Jessica's hand. They board a bus, where Kyle freaks out over the entire situation. Finn barges onto the bus with a gun, ranting that he grew up ignored, while Dan had a perfect family with snotty little kids, sending Nena into a spiral of insecurity. He demands the key. Dan tackles him. They tumble to the upper deck, and chaos erupts. Finn pulls a knife. Jessica rushes in, smacking him with a fire extinguisher and spraying foam everywhere. Finn twists her into a chokehold, forcing Dan to drop the key out the window onto a passing bicyclist. Dan jumps off after it. Later, at a small restaurant, Kyle tells Dan he prefers his mom's side of the family, much to Jessica's delight. Dan, meanwhile, contacts an old ally. A Chinese man arrives, offering supplies as repayment for past favors. The family debates what to do next. The only option seems to be fleeing London entirely. Nena objects. Her life is here, but she eventually agrees when they realize Finn will hunt them forever if they don't end this. Omar is asked if he's coming too. He shrugs and says, yeah, sure. They sneak onto a small boat and drift toward Paris. Dan sulks as Kyle refuses to speak to him. Nena tells him bluntly, this chaos started because of unresolved family secrets, so Kyle has every right to be angry. Meanwhile, Finn arrives at Liam's estate. The butler, Vikram, recognizes him instantly. Finn flashes the stolen key. Vikram reluctantly allows him inside. Finn storms through the mansion, smashing old photographs, before unlocking the central control chamber of Liam's criminal empire and activating the entire surveillance network. The Morgans dock in Paris. Dan admits he grew up there, news even to Jessica. He confesses Finn is already on his way. Their only hope is to confront him. They hitch a ride in a transport truck. Kyle complains about being hungry. Dan says he knows someone who will help, but Jessica is not going to like this. Turn out it's Dan's ex-girlfriend Lana, a former Russian spy. They arrive at Lana's home. Lana ushers them inside, bragging about the newspaper, showcasing Jessica's athletic achievements. She cooks for everyone. Max devours everything, winning Lana's approval. Kyle, terrified of offending her, forces himself to eat food he clearly hates. Later that night, Dan tells Lana he needs her help, sending a message to his father's encrypted server. Jessica and Dan discuss the confrontation they need to have with Finn. Dan doesn't want to kill him. Insists Finn is a good person, warped by Liam's neglect. He arranges a meeting at a museum, knowing Finn won't be able to sneak in weapons. At the museum, Finn admits he idolized Dan as a child, but despised watching him get the life Finn never had. Dan tells him it's not too late. Finn scoffs, calling him Daddy's pampered prince. Dan slaps him. Finn returns with more insults, declaring he owns the entire empire now. Dan warns him, if you ever threaten my family again, I'll end this. Back at the mansion, Finn hires a team of assassins and triples the bounty on Dan. Dan examines a stash of weapons Lana kept during her spy days. Jessica enters, realizing the meeting with Finn didn't go well. Dan promises he'll make up for this ruined Christmas. They take the kids on a nighttime boat ride as snow falls, trying to salvage a moment of peace. Later, Lana calls Dan into her study for a drink. After he gulps it down, she breaks into tears, admitting she slipped something into it. She can't kill him herself, but she can turn him over to the assassins hunting him. Now she feels horrible. Dan collapses. Jessica and the kids are alerted. They drag him to Lana's ancient, barely functioning car. Assassins appear outside. Kyle is shoved into the driver's seat. Jessica orders him to just drive. Kyle barrels through Paris streets, smashing restaurants, dodging gunfire, and careening downstairs while two vehicles chase them. He causes the enemy cars to crash into each other at a merging street. By dawn, the family hides on a rooftop. Dan wants to face Finn alone, but the children refuse. They insist they'll face everything together. At a restaurant, Dan reveals the mansion he grew up in. An enormous estate. The rest of the family cannot believe he never mentioned. The place is surrounded by snipers and cameras. They must sneak in through the roof. Dan and Omar will infiltrate. The rest will create a distraction. Kyle hands Dan a flash drive that could wipe Liam's whole network clean. Dan and Omar scale the rooftops while the rest settle inside a noisy car with audio equipment. They disable cameras. Finn notices something wrong. Omar distracts a sniper while Dan silently takes him down. Finn radios the guard, only to hear Kyle intentionally corrupt the audio feed with profanity. Vikram dryly comments that Liam wouldn't have tolerated any of this, then shuts off his radio. Nena leads a swarm of Greenpeace protesters into a loud demonstration outside the mansion. Police arrest Omar in the chaos, protecting Nena. Dan retrieves a childhood stash box and opens an old window using a fork he hid decades ago. He drops into a dusty attic filled with childhood belongings kept untouched. Finn arrives with assassins and Vikram. Dan notices Finn is wearing his old coat. Finn boasts the house suits him better. They drag Dan toward an execution chamber. He secretly drops the flash drive on the carpet. He whispers to the family to evacuate. Finn finds Dan's earpiece and camera, crushes them, and gives a mocking farewell. Jessica refuses to flee. She climbs to the roof and must leap across a gap despite the kids begging her not to. She lands safely, slipping through a window and discovering the flash drive. She finds the control room and plugs it in. Kyle begins hacking. An assassin enters. Jessica hides in a wardrobe, but the woman quickly senses her presence. Jessica bursts out, dodging sword strikes, flinging anything within reach. Finally, she knocks the assassin unconscious with a heavy stone bust. Downstairs, Dan escapes by cutting the lights and taking out one assassin in the chaos. Meanwhile, another assassin locates the family's car. Nena tries to start it, but it's dead. Kyle finishes the hack, and the kids flee on foot, calling the protesters again to intercept the assassin. Jessica emerges, panicked when she realizes the kids have already run. Elsewhere, Finn checks his system. For a moment, everything seems fine until data begins vanishing and accounts drain. His power evaporates. Dan appears. Finn snarls, firing wildly, forcing Dan to sprint after the gun. They crash through windows onto the mansion roof, then onto a chapel. Finn pummels Dan, but Dan grabs a bell rope for leverage. Both fight savagely. Jessica reaches the park where the kids have fled. One last assassin appears. Jessica attacks from behind, and together they shove him off a ride. The police arrive. On the chapel roof, Dan pleads once more with Finn, but Finn lunges. Dan binds him with the rope and shoves him over the ledge. The police arrest Dan. The family huddles behind the squad car, relieved. Kyle reveals he redirected all the stolen money to the Greenpeace protesters. Finn is dragged away in cuffs. Omar arrives with his father, the Secretary General of Interpol, who scolds him for hiding such a crucial detail. Omar claims he tried telling Dan earlier, but Dan never listened. Dan finally hears the truth about Jessica's Ohio State job. He beams with pride. 11 months later, the family has settled into their new Ohio life. At Christmas, Dan visits Finn in detention and returns the coat Finn once stole. Finn puts it on. Dan pulls out a deck of cards and makes him laugh for the first time. This is Mr. Afro Recap. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for the next recap.